Hello, and welcome to this video provided by the Texas Commission on the Arts on ideas for teaching and performing in poetry out loud. This session, Tapping into Authentic Emotion, features writer and performer Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton. I'm Derek Mudd, and I help coordinate Poetry Out Loud in Texas, along with my colleague, Anina Moore.
Hi, thanks for joining us today.
Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton is an internationally known writer, educator, activist, performer, and poet laureate emeritus of Houston, Texas, and has been formally ranked the #2 best female performance poet in the world. Her work has appeared in Houston Noir by Akashic Press, Black Girl Magic by Haymarket Books, The Texas Observer, and Fjords Journal, and on such platforms as NPR, BBC, ABC, Apple News, Blavity, Upworthy, and across the TedX circuit. She has served as a contributing writer to Texas Monthly and Glamour magazine. Wow. Thanks for being with us today, Deep.
No, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure. I love to start thinking about how we tap into authentic emotion. And so let's get started. So I was thinking about this session and really starting to formulate my thoughts around what does it take for a performance to be more than just kind of a recitation, right? Where does it start to land with the audience and start to resonate in ways that are impactful and that move the audience? And I started really thinking about the fact that every audience above everything else wants to feel something. They want to be moved, they want to be challenged, they want to be provoked. And the best things that we can do in kind of embodying these other people's words is to find kind of what the charm is in the moments that they've captured and created, to tap into and to be able to kind of unleash that emotion back in the world. And I think the first step in doing that is pretty simple, which is just to pick a poem that resonates with you emotionally. I think a lot of the times when we're kind of thumbing through a large catalog of work, we kind of have a hard time landing on something that really feels like we're connected to it. And we kind of look for what are the easiest things maybe to remember or to kind of wrap our minds around. But more importantly than that, I would say, is to find a work that really provokes an emotion in you. Find one that feels like something you felt before, or that speaks to a movement or a moment that you've held in your body and in your own personal experience. Those kind of poems are going to be the ones that give you the foundation for a really amazing and authentic performance. And so once you've kind of narrowed down to what the perfect piece is going to be, and you've decided like, this is it, I know this, the best thing to do is to kind of start thinking about the emotional map of the poem. And that might be a foreign idea for some of us, but I think that when every writer sits down to create a work, they start to think of not only what the emotion of the moment is, but how that emotion changes over the course of a poem. Much like a monologue, we don't want to have something that just starts in one emotion and stays there forever, right? It kind of hits us like the Visine guy on those commercials that we watched, where it's very monotone and stays there. So we want to find something to pull from that moves us from one emotion to another, that allows for discovery, that shows us how to unleash a range of emotions, because humans are complex things. You know, I often find myself people watching, or at least I did before, we kind of all were inside, and really just taking in how many emotions a person can hold in a single moment. That in one moment they could be, you know, cracking up in laughter, and that laughter could lead to these violent bursts of tears, right? And then those tears can be challenged by something nearby and suddenly turn to rage or anger. We are a roller coaster of emotions. So the more that you can get your audience to ride that roller coaster with you, the better you're going to be at being able to convince them that this is not only a work that you found and stumbled upon, but that has become part of you in some way or another. So I'm going to kind of show you what I would do once I've located that poem to tap into the emotional map of the poem. And I'm going to use a poem that's near and dear to my heart, which is called Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton. So I'm going to open it up for you, and then I'm going to read it to you in probably the blandest voice I can find, so that I'm not, you know, imputing anything on it for the first time. And then we'll kind of go through what it means to map it out and to really get some perspective. All right, here we go. Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? Had no model, Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. My one hand holding tight, my other hand, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. For me, this poem holds such a treasure trove of emotions. One, I started thinking through the idea of what it means to kind of be in danger and how danger is something that kind of lives near us at all times, right? And that we find ourselves kind of coming into contact with it, but it not being successful somehow. And I find that in that there's a place to celebrate and a place for joy. You know, we often think about separating joy from sorrow in these very like compartmentalized ways, but the reality is we wouldn't learn how to enjoy the joy without something that was sorrowful to compare it against. And so having a poem like this, I start to think of my own experiences of what were the moments and how did they exist that helped me understand what it is to be joyful and what it is to be celebratory. So I have this great icon up here, which I love. If anybody has seen Poetry Foundation, they have this great little link where you can highlight on the poem. So if you're working with students, it's really great because they can kind of take notes as they read, which is really cool. So we started thinking about what are the places where there's an initial emotion and how do those change? For me, this kind of first line here, right, which if it'll let me do it, it doesn't like me, oh, I've used it too much. I'll just leave it highlighted like that. So is kind of this premise that Lucille Clifton sets forward for us in the very beginning, right? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? And I started thinking about myself as a person and what are the things that helped me shape my life that weren't just given to me. You know, we come into the world with a certain kind of family structure, maybe a certain environment, but then we have these tenets of things that we kind of pull together for ourselves. So I think about the friends that have become family. I think about even just moving to Houston, it was a big step for me to move out of California and come to Houston and decide that I was going to create a new life here. So you may have students who have traveled around, maybe their families are in the military or they've moved a lot. They may think about what it means to reestablish themselves somewhere or to find grounding, even in as much as a new school. What do you do to kind of shape your life of your own, okay? For me, this kind of moment brings forth this idea of struggle and maybe of not being as resolute about the world, of wondering and unsurety, right? The idea of not having a model and being born in Babylon, being non-white and a woman, which we kind of think of as kind of two strikes against us in society sometimes. And coming from this place, we can kind of see how the emotional stability of this entire section kind of links together. Then something happens in this line right here. What did I see to be except myself? There's some kind of reclamation that happens there that says that despite all of these things that have been stacked against me, I still have found a way to be my own and to tap into who I want to be as a person. I can make it all up, right? I have this freedom to imagine the world the way I want it to be, even if it's not there yet. And that for me is kind of the first emotional change in this poem. Then we kind of come down here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Suddenly, we're not in the past anymore. We're right here in the present. We're thinking about the moment that we're standing, holding our own hands together, and maybe even writing this poem, right? We're becoming Lucille Clifton in some way, and we're saying that in this moment that we're holding everything, to ourselves, we have the power of being able to celebrate despite all the things that have been stacked against us. And so this is kind of the second emotional change in the poem that allows us to kind of unleash and unearth what things could be in the future, right? And then we get this last line, which I'm going to tell you, it's my favorite line out of the whole poem. I probably say it a million times. I've written it as prompts, right? I just am absolutely in love with this line, which is, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And there's something so beautiful in the contrast of being at the edge of death, right? Of being in the most violent and volatile situation, and that not working out against me, but that I have the power to triumph over it. And that thing may come to me a million times over again. And every time I can step over the hurdle of what it means to challenge me, and every time I can arrive victorious again, right? There's something really beautiful that resonates with me And I start thinking about things like when my house is broken into and everything was stolen, and my family had to kind of rebuild everything for ourselves. I think of moments like when I was having my children and I had kind of some complicated pregnancies. But even before that, and before I was an adult with like bills and things, right? As a child, I even think about things like when my father lost his job and my family had to relocate and we had to build ourselves up again from nothing. And those moments, I think, are ones that are universal. They're human, they're emotive, and they're things that we live through and maybe don't always want to talk about and don't always want to share. But somehow Lucille Clifton taps into those moments and says that we have the power to even live in that moment. And so once we kind of have this emotional map placed out for ourselves, we can start to see how it goes from just being a poem that a writer was able to write some time ago, kind of in a closet by themselves, right, in this silo, but that it becomes a journey of emotions that we've held before, ones that we know intimately, ones that we can tap back into. So the best thing to do is to be able to, one, of course, memorize the work. You had to do that anyways. You all know that, right? But that in that memorization, we start to not think of it as just like a rote remembering, but a physical remembering in our bodies, that we can tap into. What did it feel like to be a small child packing my boxes to leave a home that I grew up in because I couldn't stay there anymore, right? What does it mean to stand in the face of a bully and to know that despite them coming to me multiple times, every time I found a way to rise up again and find my voice and find myself again? Let me see if I can transcend from just recitation to this new moment of experience for myself and for the reader or the audience that's watching for me, okay? If you're able to do this, which I think is wildly important and also may take some practice, right? I think we don't always immediately come to an idea and the ones that we want to land on. I think sometimes it takes us sitting with a poem, it takes us tapping into something really honest and maybe something that we don't want to share, but know what to feel in it, right? We could then start to get ourselves out of this idea of practicing things to death, which I often tell students that I work with, don't give your best performance to the wall, right? We kind of get this idea like, I'm going to run it and run it and run it and run it, and somehow that'll make this better. But sometimes it's about running it until we kind of understand it and know it, and it's in our head and it's in our body, not until the point where we're so numb to it that we can't feel what the poem is giving us anymore. And so we can start to then say, like, how do I open my heart and emote something and feel something? More than that, allow our audience to feel something through us. So I'm going to try my hardest right now to try performing this poem. Let's do it. We're going to, I've definitely probably have lived with this poem much more than you may have at the first initial point of your understanding of your poem. But hopefully you'll live with it as well, and you'll become familiar and it'll almost become a friend to you, right? The way that words often do, and they hold us in ways that we don't imagine. So let's look at it one more time, right? Here it is. And we're going to try to take it moment by moment and see where that leads us in the form of performance, right? How is it changing from this first kind of reading through that we got to this new thing that we can live together? All right, here we go. Won't you celebrate with me what I've shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. So for us, we can see how the performance moves and changes, how we breathe life into it, right? How it's not this stagnant thing on the page anymore, but how it allows us to recount these moments, Don't be afraid of pausing, right? Don't be afraid of silence. We often think of silence as something we have to run from and we have to power through. And sometimes when we're nervous, right, those nerves are just kind of get us running and our adrenaline going, and we don't settle into the poem and we don't find a space in our footing. And so I often, before a performance or a recitation, will find myself going outside and closing my eyes and gathering myself again and thinking about that emotional map of the poem, thinking about where I want to go emotionally, and also thinking about where I want my audience to go with me. Thinking about what I want them to feel like when the poem is over, right? Is this something that I want them to be angry at the end of? Do I want them to feel charged, right? Do I want them to feel sadness? Do I want them to feel joy? And how can I orchestrate that as a performer if I'm not honest with the emotions that I have, right? So I think the best thing you can do is start to think through, what does it mean to be honest in a piece? What does it mean to be vulnerable in a piece? And these are things that are big ideas, especially for our young performers, to figure out, how do I wrangle in vulnerability when everything around me says put up a wall and push people away, right? We remember teenage angst. We remember kind of wanting to shut everybody out. But there has to be some time for us to kind of pull the walls down and to think through what it is to feel everything, even the things that hurt, even the things that cause us to be sad, and to allow ourselves to feel them at 100%. I often tell my students, perform things at 100% and then pare back. So what does it look like to do this with all of the emotion in it? What does it look like to do it with none of the emotion in it? And where do we strike the balance between being a crying mess the whole poem, right? Or being, screaming the whole poem? And where do we find the subtleties of saying, in this moment, I want to be sad, but in this moment, I'm going to claim joy. And in this moment, I'm going to claim anger. And in this moment, I'm going to be resolved. The more you can lead your students through really isolating what those moments are and transcending from one to the next, the more successful they'll be in being able to pull it off. And so I know that you all have it in you. I know that we all do, right? We have this ability to feel, and that's what makes us human. And no matter where we come from or what we have struggled through in our lives, we know how to feel. And so the more that you push your students into really kind of claiming that space as one for them, that they can feel everything and they can be honest with themselves and with the work, then you're going to start to see a change in them. I would say I also suggest taking an author somewhat like Lucille Clifton, right, for me is one of my faves, and reading a couple other of their works. Get a sense of a tonality and an emotional resonance that they carry with them throughout their work. A lot of writers, no matter what they're writing about, kind of have a voice and a style. And once you're able to kind of see what that is and examine it, students will find themselves figuring out a little bit better how to, I hate to say mimic because I don't think that's it, but how to tap into what the spirit of that is, and then how to let it live in their own bodies. And so I think having students recite work into a video camera and be able to kind of listen to themselves and see themselves is wildly important. Ask themselves how they felt watching themselves, right? And of course, the initial is going to be critiquing and is going to be kind of tearing themselves apart and saying things like, I don't like my voice, right? But I think once they get past that, they're going to start to be able to watch themselves and just ask them things like, did you feel goosebumps when you were listening to yourself? Or was there something in you that changed in listening to you from the first time you heard yourself to now? Chronicling those experiences as they start to perfect it will really help them start to be able to look at it with a new eye and find what is the thing that works. And it may take a little while, but I definitely know they can do it. And so I'm wishing you the best in this journey. I know that you can do it. And just remember, make that emotional map and then just follow it all the way to success. Thank you all for taking some time with me.
And thank you, Deborah. We really appreciate it. That's such great advice and a lot of things for the teachers and for students to think about as they approach the work on Poetry Out Loud. And Nina, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I feel like this is mainly a summary of what D.E.E.P just did. But a lot of times when we talk about Poetry Out Loud, it's hard to talk about like the opportunities for self-expression when the student is engaging with someone else's poem, and also the danger of performing something all the way out as opposed to auctioning it off through a recitation or just kind of reciting it. And the best way that I've come up with in terms of talking about like a good recitation of poetry out loud, of a poetry out loud poem, is to embody it. And I think that Deep's discussion really gives a good through line on tools that students can use to embody a poem. So thank you.
Any final thoughts? Yeah.
No, I just think that don't discount your students' work, and students, don't discount your own voice and experiences. Even if you haven't lived the hardest life in the world, that doesn't mean that you can't connect to really difficult work. I think all of us have struggled, and there's no comparison in suffering. And so whatever you bring to the poem is right. Whatever feelings you bring are right, and follow them through. Trust your gut, because you got this.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this video. We hope you'll watch the other videos in the series, and best of luck on your school competitions.